Hello, Mike. How are you?
Mike, how are you?
Good. Why did the Richie Incognito story resurface again yesterday? What compelled him to take to Twitter?
Well, Richie was just being Richie, and Richie is very frustrated that he has yet to be publicly exonerated by the Ted Wells report. The report is due out any day now. I predict it'll be delivered to the media at roughly 5 o'clock Eastern Time on Friday, which is the last hour before the start of a three-day weekend with the Olympics going on and All-Star weekend. And presumably, hopefully, from the NFL's perspective, the media won't pay as much attention to that report as it otherwise could or should. But Incognito is just, he's antsy, he's impatient, he wants everyone to know that he didn't do anything wrong, and he wants that report to exonerate him. And he's popped off a couple of times, but yesterday was the most aggressive, and he had to be going against the advice of his agents and lawyers. And I think eventually his lawyer told him to shut up, and he responded to that by shutting up and then posting his lawyer's phone number on Twitter.
Mike, will he? Your gut feeling? Will he be at some level exonerated when the report comes out?
Yeah, I have a feeling that the truth, as it always seems to be, is going to be somewhere in the middle of what Incognito has said and what Jonathan Martin has alleged. I think the NFL would very much love to find a way to make everybody look good and let everyone save face. I don't know quite how you do it, but I think there's a way to say that maybe Jonathan Martin perceived things a certain way, reasonably perceived them a certain way, and maybe they weren't intended that way. So Martin had good reason to leave. Incognito didn't do anything all that wrong. The Dolphins in the future need to have procedures in place to spot these problems. Everybody maybe gets a little mud thrown on them, but also everyone comes out of it with a way to say, we did the best we could under the circumstances that were presented to us.
Talking with Mike Florio on the Dan Patrick Show, has this story changed the way teams deal with their locker room? Have they had to be proactive now on how they move forward?
I think the reality is, Mike, most teams already were, and most teams have been proactive for years. This is just a situation in Miami where the various ingredients that got thrown together. You have a guy like Richie Incognito, and the Dolphins knew all about Richie when they made him a member of the team several years ago. You have him in the locker room. You have Jonathan Martin in the locker room, and the scouts and the general managers and the coaches knew what Martin was about, and they knew that there were concerns about toughness. They knew that from the moment Martin showed up for the first rookie minicamp. And so when you have those guys there, if you're not paying the right level of attention and you don't have the right level of sensitivity, you can have things happen that ultimately become a problem. Assuming that there was something that happened that Martin reasonably should have and could have concluded was in some way improper. It's entirely possible that whatever occurred, a reasonable person shouldn't have been troubled by it in light of the way things work in an NFL locker room, but for whatever reason, Martin saw it a different way.
Tomorrow, who would be more welcomed walking into any NFL locker room, Richie Incognito or Jonathan Martin?
You know, that's a great question. For a while, I thought both guys will be welcomed, although Incognito more likely, based on what we've seen, based on the text messages, Incognito more likely to be welcomed because you know who he is. Some teams think they need guys like that in the locker room, and you have guys like that beyond Richie Incognito who can keep him under control. After Incognito's tirade yesterday, I tell you what, I could see how teams would be troubled that this guy just doesn't get it. And if he is exonerated, and if he is signed to a new team, is he going to be even worse than he was in Miami? So I think for now, both guys can play, so both guys are going to get another opportunity. But I'd still say Incognito a little more welcome because there's no doubt about his desire to play with Martin. There's still a question as to whether or not he really does want to play in the NFL.
Mike, the Cleveland Browns, their storyline, again, earlier this week, becoming a big mess. Is that a mess that will be cleaned up, or is it just a mess?
It's a mess, and it's going to be hard to clean it up in the short term because now you've got a new general manager in Ray Farmer who wouldn't have necessarily hired Mike Pettin to be the head coach if Ray Farmer was the guy who was making the decision on who the head coach was going to be. It's been reported, it's been acknowledged that Ray Farmer wasn't involved in the interviews of the coaching candidates who ultimately were considered this time around. And so now you've got another situation where the GM and the coach may not ultimately be on the same page. Their best approach is to come together and assume that if they can't get things pointed in the right direction, they're both going to get fired. And if they have that equal accountability, then maybe they forge a true partnership. And I think if this thing doesn't work, it's just a matter of time before Jimmy Haslam puts together a big bag full of money and offers it to Peyton Manning to come run that football team when Peyton Manning retires.
He's Mike Florio, ProFootballTalk.com, joining us on the Dan Patrick Show. And the Michael Sam story obviously was the headline, has been the headline. There have been NFL players that have said the right thing, and there have been NFL players that have said the wrong thing. How does the league believe that this week has gone for them?
Well, I think so far the league isn't overly troubled by anything that any of the teams have said, and there have been statements issued, and there have been. I think Thomas Dimitroff of the Falcons actually did a question and answer. I think a lot of the teams would prefer to write something up and send it out so they don't say the wrong thing. Next week, it's going to be very interesting to see what happens when coaches and general managers have press conferences and they're speaking extemporaneously. Will they say the right things then? And this is all happening in the confines of this draft process, which is entirely secretive, and there's misdirection, and there's false information, and this is just a strange, bizarre time for the NFL. But you're going to look at the timing of this and say it's kind of a good thing that all teams have 3 months to think about this, process it. The locker rooms, in any locker room, Michael Sam could show up as a member of the team 3 months from now. And Roger Goodell said yesterday there's going to be further training on what's expected of the players. And I think it's important that the players all know and understand what they can and can't do, what they can and can't say, given this new dynamic that's going to affect at least one NFL locker room.
Mike, is there any way to understand in advance the impact of Michael Sam's draft status with this information?
I don't think there is because, for every team that could be inclined to pass on Michael Sam, there could be a team that now wants to be the team that embraces the first openly gay NFL player, an owner who wants to be the closest thing to a modern-day Branch Rickey. And I know it's not apples to apples to compare Michael Sam to Jackie Robinson, but Michael Sam's the closest thing that we're going to have to a modern-day Jackie Robinson. So 20 years from now, does one of these owners want to be viewed as the guy who was progressive, who saw what the right thing to do was? Does that actually bump up his draft stock? And then through it all, you've got the analysis that applies to every player out there. Can I get this guy in a later round? Maybe there's a team that loves Michael Sam as a third-round pick and now thinks, you know what? Maybe I can get him in the fourth round, so I'll pass over. And if he's there in the fourth round, maybe I'll get him in the fifth round, and I come out of it with a better class of draft players. That's one of the realities that will affect Michael Sam in ways that no one can predict.
Last thought on this. Do you believe that this opens the door for a current NFL player to release this information and to come out as openly gay?
That question has been bouncing around inside my head the last 3 days because if another player does it now, how's it going to be perceived? Like, why didn't you do it before? Why did it take a rookie who's coming in for you to muster the courage to step up and do it? And then there's this notion that people think it's courageous for Michael Sam to do what he did, and it is. But that doesn't mean it's cowardly for guys to choose to live their lives the way they have been, which is gay, but I'm keeping it to myself. I'm not telling anyone else. And I hope that there isn't a push to out guys who choose to live a certain way just because there needs to be some show of solidarity and support for Michael Sam. So there's a can of worms floating around here that I hope guys who are comfortable living their lives the way they are don't get pushed into doing something maybe they don't want to do.
Mike, really good stuff. Thanks for taking a little time to be with us, even though it's not Dan in the chair. You've been here. This is a little different, isn't it?
Oh, but it's fun. Hanging out with those guys, eating beef jerky, looking for any legal beverages that may be floating around. It's a great place to be.
Thanks, Mike. We appreciate it.
All right. See you, pal.
Mike Florio, ProFootballTalk.com.